So I'm Dave from Black Leadership Analysis, and I want to give you a presentation on the shadow and disowned self based off the work of Nathaniel Braden. And I want to start with a quote from James Baldwin, and the quote is, "It took many years of vomiting up all the filth I'd been taught about myself and half believed before I was able to walk on the earth as though I had a right to be here." That's James Baldwin.
Right.
So, starting off with Branden. Nathaniel Braden's work focused on how self-esteem influences our ability to reason. Branden views mental health as the ability to properly perceive reality through reason, taking into account emotions. He explains in detail the relationship between values, emotions, reason, and ultimately self-esteem. So the important thing about Branden is that he actually coined the term self-esteem, and his most famous book was The 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem. So he defines self-esteem as the knowledge that a person is effective at life and worthy of happiness. And so if you have high self-esteem, that's your motivator to have high mental health. And from there you'll have good values, and then the lack of self-esteem is completely a disaster. So that's how it ties in to the 6 pillars. So Branden wanted his patients to integrate thoughts, feelings, and actions to have the best interactions with reality. Often people take reason as a paramount, putting aside feelings. Others put feelings at the forefront and neglecting reason. And overemphasizing either one of those is actually a form of avoidance. So if you have people that over-reason, they'll have very dry lives and they'll end up repressing their emotions, which will cause them to act out, self-sabotage. And if people put their emotions first, they'll just be irrational all the time and just seek after whims. They'll never build anything solid. And ultimately, whim worshiping just ends up bringing people depression, guilt, and anger. So you want to be somewhere in the middle, and that's one of the things I love about Branden's work, because he doesn't overemphasize being reason or being logical over emotion. He wants you to put them both together, and I think that is really the sign of proper mental health. Anybody want to jump in with the question? I'm good with that. You can just jump in.
Already.
Okay.
I want to add to that what I was impressed by rereading and how he also balances our internal and external influences, how he really acknowledges both.
Yeah, I think Branden actually has a very healthy orange beam view of psychology, and I think it's a good starting place for anybody who wants to learn about self-esteem and shadow as a good jumping off point. So what is awareness? So awareness is selective and it comes in various degrees. There's focal awareness, where you specifically concentrate on something. Let's say you're doing a test, you're specifically concentrating on it. There's peripheral awareness. Let's say the student beside you is making a lot of noise, or if the girl beside you is pretty, that might be in your peripheral awareness. There are things you might be completely unaware of, like the hum of the AC unit, which wouldn't be something that comes up in your forethought. And then there's also unconscious things you're aware of. And the unconscious is something that's actually very vital to mental health. A lot of times when people are studying shadow, they feel like the point is just to bring everything up to your awareness. But subconscious is really important, because if your brain doesn't do some of the evaluation automatically, you would just be overwhelmed all the time. And so what your mind will eventually do is rate all the different stimuli you get and put them in the proper level of awareness. And after a while, your subconscious will store past evaluations of stimuli and past recognitions of stimuli, so you can move through the world faster. And then the subconscious can bring to the forefront different things that you need at that moment when you need it. So subconscious is a very important tool for everybody. So we defined emotions as automatic value responses conducted by the person's subconscious. The subconscious is the storehouse for all your knowledge and experience, and it allows for a person to evaluate things automatically. This allows conscious mind to put the most important things in the person's awareness. Emotions have mental as well as somatic features. So positive emotions elicit pleasure and negative emotions elicit pain. The level of pleasure and pain is automatic judgment on how good or bad something is for the evaluator. Now, Branden frames evaluation as something that's for me or against me, which I think is a very orange meme way to look at. Yeah,
that's dichotomous.
Yeah, it's dichotomous, and it's very much centered around the self.
Well, it's egocentric.
Yeah, it's very egocentric.
Yeah.
So I think integralists can expand the idea of valuation beyond that, but like I said, I think this is a good starting point for somebody who never looked into any of this stuff again. So what is reason? So reason is the part of awareness that's completely under your control, and it's a conceptual instrument of awareness. Reason also has two basic functions: cognition, which is recognizing what a stimulus is, and then the evaluation, deciding if it's for me or against me, and what degree of harm or help could it bring to me. So that is reason and cognition. We use that interchangeably. Yes?
Well, I was going to say, well, what does it, is it a process, that evaluation process? Because sometimes, well, at least I'll speak for myself, sometimes I'm sure I know what the reasonable thing is, or maybe the wiser thing, or things like that, and it doesn't necessarily mean I do it.
Okay, well, so in this study, we're going to say that when you act in the irrational way, that is probably caused by some type of shadow. Now, I think that it's also possible that you looked at the reasonable thing to do and chose not to act reasonably, too. I think that's also a conscious...
Or maybe I was choosing to act trans-rational.
Yes.
Which isn't part of this.
Yes, that's not part of anything
Right.
Branden ever said. But yeah, you could be acting trans-rationally.
Mm-hmm.
So the Wilbur guys are going to love that you brought that up. So values are a mix of rational and irrational evaluations, and often they cause conflict. And I think that's great that Branden talks so much about values, because that's going to make it very easy to weld into the Claire Graves Beck model. I think one of the problems with Integral with Claire Graves and Don Beck is that there's not enough emphasis on shadow, and that there needs to be like more specific ways to work through shadow. I think it's one thing Wilbur has on Don Beck and Claire Graves. So a flaw in these value evaluations could lead to adverse consequences and self-sabotage. And if you understand your values and clearly define them, you'll be able to modify your behavior and act in a better way as you go through. So what Branden's talking about here a lot is self-sabotage. When people get upset and act irrationally and then it ruin their lives. So he's trying to make people avoid that. And the idea is that acting rationally will reduce the amount of self-sabotage you'll end up encountering in your life. Okay, stimulus, response, and cause of shadow. So normally a person sees something in the world, evaluates it against his values, and he elicits an emotion. And then they can determine to act on it or not act on it. So the shadow is created when a person has a value and has a value that stimulates an emotion that is not desirable, and they feel like they have to repress it because either they think it makes them inherently a bad person for simply thinking something, or they think that if they have the emotion, they're going to act on it. So repression of an emotion happens in a number of ways. Internally, a person feels tightness in the muscles, numbness in the body, and shallowness in breathing. Externally, it could cause a person to present an unreal self to the world. So one of the things I find interesting about Branden is Branden did not promote meditation. He thought a lot of times people were just doing it as an escape. However, if you read his work, a lot of his work is about connecting to the somatic results of your thoughts. And by connecting to the somatic results of your thoughts, you'll become even more aware of what you feel. And that awareness in and of itself can bring healing.
Becomes a biofeedback mechanism also.
Yeah, it definitely becomes a biofeedback mechanism. So the repression always begins as a voluntary action. You choose to do this. And after repeated instances of the repression, it becomes automatic. Just like any other value response, after a certain amount of time will become automatic. So once the subconscious has repressed the emotion, it will expand to affect the memory of similar events. So let's say you have a bad time here at this restaurant. Well, if it's repressed, it actually can expand and actually start making you feel this way about Asian restaurants in general. And the repression has a negative effect on many areas of a person's life due to repression influences on decision making. So when you repress these emotions, then you'll act on them without knowing you're acting on them. And that's what's going to lead to your self-sabotage. So what causes shadow? And it's really important with this because the need to get societal and parental approval causes a person to repress an emotion that repress emotions to act in an acceptable manner. And then the repression rarely causes the ideal response. So if you do the shadow work, what you'll find is oftentimes people start being angry or blaming their parents or blaming society for why they had to repress it. And that's not a dichotomy to Branden. He sees parents as essentially the agents of society that are in your life all the time. And so people fear feeling their full emotions because they're scared that, one, simply feeling the emotion in and of itself makes them a bad person. And that's something that's reinforced by Christianity in Branden's opinion. So Branden was not a proponent of Christianity at all. So it's interesting to note here that Nathaniel Braden was actually born Jewish. And of course so was Ayn Rand. But they didn't want to continue in the faith. So they actually changed their name. So his original name, I want to say, was Blumenthal. And he changed his name to Branden because that was the brand of typewriter he used. And Ayn Rand used a Rand brand typewriter, so she changed her name to Rand. And so they they renamed themselves.
Did he say anything about commonly in this like repression thing, you talk about a child particularly fearing loss of parent love or loss of being active in the community? I mean, you've got here parents of action, shadow caused by the actual need to function in society.
Yeah.
But, is that the closest he got to talking about, fear of a parent, loss of parent love? Or?
See, I don't remember him talking specifically about loss of a parent love as much as just being reprimanded.
He didn't say that.
No, he didn't say that.
Yeah, right.
He was more about being reprimanded, spanked or something like that.
Okay. What year was he writing?
So this was in 71 or 2, this book.
Okay. I guess spanking was still around then. So.
Yeah.
Physical punishment.
Well, spanking's still around now. Don't.
Yeah, no, I know.
Didn't go anywhere.
Exactly.
This sounds very
really,
Freudian, doesn't it?
Really rough treatment.
Yeah, it does.
Really rough treatment of a child. Yeah. But yes, it is. And yeah.
Yeah, it definitely
Well,
is Freudian.
Yeah, but there's truth in Freud as well as everybody else, right?
Yeah, but I like that Branden at least expanded it to society in general too.
Right, yeah.
So it's not just be angry
not
at your parents.
Right, yeah.
Now it's also important to know Branden didn't want people sitting around and blaming their parents and wallowing in the anger and guilt either.
Right.
He says you have
spending years in psychoanalysis.
Exactly.
Right.
He wanted people to actually take control of their life, take responsibility, and do and perform different actions. And that's what I love about Branden's work. It's very action-oriented, And because this is a lot of the work, this Branden work is what I used when I originally was depressed. I actually started with the 6 pillars, and I went through the book and did the exercises in the book. And from there, I started getting interested in more of Branden's work. And then I found out he founded libertarianism, and I was like,
Does
but
he have the sentence completions? Is that Branden?
yeah, that's Branden,
Okay,
sentence
that's Branden.
completions.
Okay.
So
As part of an assessment?
yeah, so the way, I'm going to get to that later, but with the sentence completion exercises, you start off with a sentence stem, and you finish it as quickly as possible 5 times. And that's how you get to your root emotions around something.
Oh, that's interesting. So same sentence 5 times. It's like each time you go deeper or something. That's cool.
Yeah. So parents should provide their children physical touch, respect, love, physical protection, just punishment, and freedom to explore. And again, I see all those things that can be actually harmed by society, even if the parent doesn't want the kid to do that. Because I remember there's this book by Joy DeGruy that is called Post-Traumatic Slavery Syndrome. And the book was about how, one of the chapters was about black parenting. And they're talking about how black parents are often more harsh on their kids in stores than white parents are. And it's because they realize that the kids are seen as older than what they really are. Yeah. So if the kid was running through the store and breaking something, that could be a way bigger consequence for their kid than other kids. So that could actually ruin your freedom to explore right there. And it's not because the parent is a bad parent or just is like evil. It's because they understand the world they're working under. And Joy DeGruy,
Ta-Nehisi Coates writes about that.
Exactly. And so Joy DeGruy had this whole talk about this. And so she's talking about a white mother and a black mother. So they see them, they have the kids there, and the white mother saying, "Oh, my kid does this and that. He's so smart. He does this. Oh, and your kid's good too." And the black mother automatically starts putting down her kid. And they're like, "So why do we always do that?" Because that's a very common thing. And so Joy DeGruy theorizes that, you know, if they were on a plantation, if the slave master thinks her kid is very valuable, then they'll sell the kid. So that mannerism was just something passed down from generation to generation subconsciously. But by the time you realize it, the damage is already done. And so that's one of the things that I wish, you know, he had more knowledge of, Branden. Exactly how society could affect all those things to keep a parent from doing it. And I don't think he really had the people around him to explain all that to him. And so when I was reading the book, I could see a lot of that like going on because I'm doing my own shadow work while I'm reading the book. So yeah, like I said, this diversity is very important in this psychoanalysis. So the next slide is about self-esteem and shadow. So self-esteem is going to be the driving force to get a person to working on their shadow. And this is something you have to do yourself. This isn't something your therapist can do for you or your friends. You have to be motivated to do it yourself. So self-esteem has a huge effect on the creation and removal of shadow. And the main thing is self-awareness, the ability to recognize something that is in you and at least accept it if you don't like it or not. So this whole idea of self-awareness is really, really important. Being able to bring these things out of your subconscious and sit with them and acknowledge them and not try to push them aside.
And I have to say, working with coaching clients over the years, it's not just the negative in the sense of people in terms of the shadow part of acknowledging, let's say, I have a proclivity to, I don't know, do something impulsively that I should not do or whatever, and having awareness about that. But it's also awareness of what my potentials are and what my gifts are.
Yeah.
It was so hard in working with a lot of clients for them to really, really acknowledge their gifts.
Yeah, I totally see that. I have that problem myself, you know, because I have I feel like Wilbur calls it the golden shadow.
Yeah.
When you repress the good sides of yourself because you're afraid of what people will say and how you'll be perceived. And, you know, I can feel that. I have issues with that myself. And then self-acceptance, like Branden was talking about. Self-acceptance is really big as far as being able to not like what the emotion is, but at least be able to accept it and understand how it's affecting your life. And simply being aware is enough for Branden. So what he wants people to do is just be able to sit with things and be aware of them, so they can work through them. So I can move on to methods if you want to. It's only 7:41. Does anybody have any questions on the shadow or want to talk more about the shadow?
Did he talk about Jung at all?
No, I don't think he liked Jung at all.
Oh.
I don't think he was a big Jung fan. Branden,
Wouldn't it be wonderful to know why he didn't? I mean, what were the differences? Like even I mean, I'm fantasizing a conversation between the two of them where they would agree or disagree.
I have a little presentation on his views on other philosophies.
Okay.
But I want to go through methods real quick.
Okay, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No. So I weren't able to finish these slides.
Yeah.
So I didn't print them all out for everybody. Here's quick notes.
Have you sent them to them?
Yeah, I'll send them to you, but they're not finished. I need to keep working on them. So the goals of shadow work is to find negative emotions buried in the subconscious. And so simple awareness of the emotion will trigger a natural healing process in the mind. And awareness alone is enough to move through your shadow.
So is it only, and this is what I have trouble with the common and current discussion about shadow, is it only finding negative emotions?
Oh, I think.
I mean, he is saying that.
That's
right?
that's what he's saying.
What do you think?
Oh no, it's definitely good and bad. Because even with my therapist, I've always been, kind of booky, and I've kind of feel I'm intellectual, but it's hard for me to say that I'm intellectual because there's so much, negative societal blowback against that. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
To say you're smart.
Right. Yeah.
Because it means that you think you're better than people, even if it doesn't.
Right.
And I remember even when I was younger, I would have a big vocabulary, and I would just use words that I would normally use. People were like, "Oh, you're trying to be smarter than everybody else."
Yeah.
And so it's even hard, even me now just talking about being intellectual, like admitting I'm intellectual. Like it's hard for me to do that because I've had so much around that. So I've oftentimes I'll kind of keep to myself and not talk as much, and and stuff like that. And it's really hurt my ability to be around people, especially when I was younger.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, Golden Shadow was a big thing, and I don't think Branden really got into Golden Shadow.
Yeah, but identifying what one has an affinity to, what one loves, what one's attracted to, what one really values in the deepest kind of way, the positive views of self, all those things. As part of the process.
Yeah.
But he specifically spoke about acknowledging negative feelings.
Yes, exactly. I didn't see anything of him, so I haven't read every single thing he wrote, but I haven't seen him talk about anything that's Golden Shadow.
Yeah. Okay. How old was he when he started writing in the 70s?
He was around 40.
Okay. So he is a product at 40, so what was his birthday? He was born in 1930?
Yeah.
So he was a product of the parenting of the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, which had so much requirement for conformity. So it makes sense to me that he is focusing on this, because there was so much where you did have to present a picture to the world, the mask to the world, and hide yourself. So, I mean, he's gifting us with this. But he's also a product, of that time, that that parenting where you shape the child to fit in society.
Yeah, that's 100% true.
Yeah.
So, what shadow is not, though, it's not just shifting blame for bad parts of yourself onto your parents or society. You have to take responsibility for who you are and what your reactions are. And it's not going to unveil some root cause to all the problems in your life. You're still going to have issues, you're still going to have problems, and some things are just part of who you are. Let's say you're a shy person. That is possible, that's just part of who you are, and it's not necessarily caused by some trauma when you were younger. You're not just going to unearth all your childhood trauma, and it's not going to turn you into an ideal version of yourself. So one of his methods was the repeated phrase. So it's find a short phrase that describes a controlling emotion. So the examples would be something like I want and I'm angry when. And then watch for tension in the jaw and body. So you would just repeat the phrase I want and then just the first thing that pops in your mind. And you would lay there and keep doing that till you feel the somatic feelings on your body. Now, Branden talks about this. I don't see how anybody could do this without serious meditation training, even though he wasn't big on meditation.
Okay, and can you say more about that connection for you?
Oh, meditation and then feeling the body and stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, for me, I didn't really, wasn't able to really feel my body until I started meditating. I would never even stop to like be in the moment and feel like anything somatic going on in my body. I would just be completely rational and just trying to fit in. So,
Can I just ask one point of inquiry question?
Mm-hmm.
Were you involved very much in sports or anything like
No,
that?
I wasn't. I did a little football, but not in high school or anything. I did a little karate, but it wasn't.
If I can ask a more detailed question about the method. So the idea was you would take a phrase like I want or
I'm angry when.
Or something. Is the idea that that would produce an emotional response?
Yes,
Okay.
that's the
So
idea.
you'd pick a phrase that would produce an emotional response, and then you'd keep repeating it and basically keep answering it
Yeah.
until what type of somatic experience is coming up. I'm not sure I understand.
I think he's looking for tension in the body because something is repressed.
Okay, and then so let's say I want da, 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 da. I'm 10 answers into it and I'm feeling a lot of tension. Then what?
I'm not sure. He actually wasn't good at explaining these methods. Like I didn't. I mean, that's why I never finished this part of it. I'm just going to throw some of the stuff out there, and maybe people will be able to. Like I actually did this.
No, I was curious. Did you try it yourself?
Yeah, I tried it, and after a while, I just did it to where I would. I put on the Bluetooth microphone piece, and I would lay down with this app and record what I had to say. And I would just talk about like a adverse experience in my life. And then once it's recorded, I would the next day put the earphones in and listen to it and just feel what comes up while I'm listening to it.
Wow, that's cool.
And I would,
Wow.
yeah. And so,
And what
Really
happened
listening to
then?
yourself.
well, I did feel a lot of
Listen to
tension.
yourself and you'd feel.
I feel tension, I feel angry, and I would understand. I think I understood a little bit more why I made decisions that I made. You know, why I might have got angry when I shouldn't have got angry and things like that. But that's what I would do for shadow work, would be to take a cell phone app, record yourself talking about a negative situation, and then play it back while you're meditating and see what comes up and what feels.
I've never heard of that. That's amazing.
I made it up myself. I mean, I tried some of this stuff, and he didn't explain it well, honestly. And so I just kind of started freewheeling.
And also, if you're a somatic learner or you're very somatic, you can do the opposite as well. You can, this is something that I will do with things, is I will notice, because I'm pretty, also quite always been pretty
In your
grounded
body.
in my body. And so I would notice like an emotion or something would arise in me, or like I know now, if something is arising and I'm feeling like I'm being gripped in my throat, I know that is grief, loss. Now grief is not only associated with death, so that's something that's an important distinction, at least for me. So I will realize, and then it's interesting because I also will think, but it hasn't played out in this way for me, that this is supposedly the chakra of creative expression.
Throat chakra, yeah.
Throat chakra, and as well. So if I feel that, I say, oh, are you feeling you're not creating also? Is that where maybe the grief is, or the grief could be any number of things. But just, I recognize, different things that will arise in a body and work backward. Okay, what is,
For me, I had a lot of anger issues, and anger for me shows up as heat. So I will literally feel hotter as I'm going through the exercise, and very anxious and jittery. I can feel my arms wanting to move, because I feel like I had to repress a lot of anger growing up, because I remember growing up, I always wanted to make good grades. If you get suspended, you're probably going to have bad grades and everything. So there's a lot of times that, growing up, schoolyard fights and stuff, I walked away from stuff because I knew it was better for your grades to do that. So I repressed a lot of anger. And it's a good thing in a lot of ways, because just being angry and fighting all the time isn't a solution. but at the same time, I didn't learn any healthy ways to express anger.
Right.
And that's something I'm still working with and struggling now. So.
Does Branden talk about the difference between suppression and repression at all? Like,
No.
It sounded like what you were doing, especially when you got a little older, was suppression, where you made a decision. This has to do with, if I get involved in this fight, my grades are gonna be down, or I'm gonna get suspended and my grades will be down. That is actually suppression rather than repression.
Well,
So I've never
had good impulse control too.
Yeah, that's true.
So, I mean,
And we're behaving rationally.
Yeah.
when it's in conscious thought and it's making a choice, then that's, to me, the distinction, the way I learned it, was the distinction between suppression and repression.
See, yeah, I didn't
Do that.
I didn't get that from the book.
Right.
I didn't get
okay.
that from the book.
Okay.
If I can make an interesting, or what to me is an interesting point also, one of the things that's always curious for me with doing like shadow work and things like this is I don't have memories of anything particularly challenging. Actually, I mean, there's just a ton of stuff I just don't remember. Not because I've repressed anything, it's just like nothing was so interesting and I just don't have a detailed sort of memory. So if I'm trying to access things, doing it through the body, like what you were saying, Kit, is a nice way to do it, because it's not like, oh, there was this incident and I've got to clear about it. It's like, something's not going right for me now. I know there's something that's out of whack. So I don't have like, oh, there was this moment of trauma when I was five. Like, I don't have any of that. But to go into where the body holds it and to access it that way and allow that to move can be very powerful. Also, in situations where people don't, the body is remembering, but the mind isn't remembering or hasn't registered anything as particularly relevant.
Yeah. Another method he brings up is the Deathbed Confession. So a person imagines they're on their deathbed, but they're in no pain. The person chooses one of their parents and also a perfect parent, and they make all these confessions to their parent on their deathbed, and they kind of see what they would say to their parent if they were on their deathbed. And it needs to be done lying on the floor with the legs crossed and the arms to the side like you would a coffin. And he's watching for tension in the jaw and pain in the body. He wants you to watch over those.
He must have had a lot
That
of
would be
tension
pain in
in
the
his
hips,
jaw.
the butt, the leg.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Nothing to do with that, but just to do with being on the floor. Sorry.
Yes. No. The sentence stem exercises. I actually have a list that I haven't uploaded to my website yet of all the sentence stems from 6 pillars. But you put the sentence stems up and you write
What stems?
sentence stems.
Oh, okay.
And you put the sentence stem up and you complete it 5 times as quickly as you can to see what you get to. And there's about 30 or so in 6 pillars. And I'm going to go ahead and upload those today or tomorrow if anybody wants to.
Yeah.
All right.
Did Cook Reuter, I mean, her assessment is sentence completion, is it not?
I think that was
It's a different idea.
Yeah, I think it's a different idea, but I also think that the sentence completion was just something big in the 70s.
Yes, it was.
And then
Yeah,
people...
In psychological testing, it was.
Yeah, and I think people just adopted it for their own methods as they went through.
Was he still around in the 90s?
Yeah, he was still around in the 90s. He was, big critic of Ayn Rand by then.
Did they split? And
Yeah,
he
they
wasn't-
split. They were dating each other from the time he was around 25 to about 45.
And they were both married?
They're both married.
Were they around the same age?
No, she was 20 years older. And one of the things he talked about a lot was how proud he was from himself to be able to satisfy a 40-year-old woman. And so, like, he would actually come, and he would actually come to her house.
Match.
He would come to her house, and he would kick her husband out of the house and have sex with her in the house with them, in their house and stuff.
Yeah.
And so her husband actually goes like a little bit crazy and starts drinking all the time. And I'm pretty sure I'll start drinking too in that situation.
Either that or go find another woman someplace else.
There's got to be some sort
Why
of.
do people like to do that?
That's not something you want to repress.
And so, and they had this long affair, and it was something that was a open secret in the society they started about libertarianism. And so, I can't remember the whole story now, but I read the book Judgment Day by Branden, and he talks about it in Judgment Day. And he was talking about Alan Greenspan was one of the inner circle people.
Oh, that's
Alan
right.
Greenspan is one of the few people. I mean, I've wanted to just go up to him if I were ever see him and say, "Shame on you, shame on you, shame on you, shame on you." And of course, in Judaism, that's you. It's like a terrible thing to ever shame or shame anyone.
Yeah.
It's a terrible thing. You're just never supposed to do that. But I thought, oh, I won't do it, but I will feel like doing it.
Yeah, and so him and his wife always had all these problems. And he talked about how he married his wife because he thought she was like the perfect textbook girl. You know, like if you were like having a Hallmark movie, she would be the woman you would cast in the Hallmark movie. And so he was kind of like, I should love this woman, but he never really did. You know? Yeah, this book was wild.
Was he writing this while he was married? He wrote this when he was married?
No, second wife. He was married to his second wife. He ends up divorcing the first wife over all this, and he has to come clean to the society. And Alan Greenspan, when he tells him all the stuff that happened, Alan Greenspan's like, oh, well, the problem is you just care too much about sex. And he told Alan Greenspan he was a eunuch and like cussed him out.
That's in the book?
This is all in the book.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
Well, so
this guy was running our economy.
well, Barbara, is that the second wife, Barbara? Or is that the first?
I think that's the first wife.
Oh, Barbara's the first wife. Okay.
The first wife of this man?
Yes.
Nathaniel.
Yeah, and then he gets married a second time, but the woman dies. And he gets married a third time after that. But it was a really interesting book. That was a wild book about all the different stuff that he did. So he wrote his first book before he had his PhD too. That was another thing I just learned. So he got his PhD from the California Graduate Institute. It was like a brand new certification program. It wasn't really a school, so a lot of people didn't respect him in the psychological world because he hadn't gone to like, an Ivy League or whatnot. So, well, that's all I got on Branden for right now. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop this. I thank everybody from listening from YouTube, and if you like this, please donate at sdandrace@gmail.com.